Last night, Arsenal suffered a 2-0 defeat away at Newcastle, their third defeat to Newcastle in the same season without scoring a single goal. I'm going to be talking about the Arsenal performance, I'm going to be talking about Newcastle's style, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about the two different forward lines and how they massively changed this game for both sides. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to Arsenal Unfiltered, your 3 times a week dose of Arsenal coverage with me, your host Mark. Thank you for joining me today for this match review podcast of Arsenal 0, Newcastle 2, a 4-0 aggregate defeat in our League Cup semi-final against the Geordies. Before I get into it, I hope you are well wherever you are. I hope you have recovered from the disappointment of last night and you are, like the guys, enjoying the kind of joys of a theoretical trip to Dubai. They are obviously probably on a plane right now going there. Hopefully you have gone there in your mind and you are feeling as serene as hopefully those guys will very soon. I hope you are well and your family are well and everything is going well for you. Let's get into it then, shall we? Because last night was a really interesting performance from an Arsenal point of view, and it is our third, as I said at the top, our third defeat to Newcastle in the same season without scoring a single goal. I want to talk first of all about our performance because I write notes for every game. It helps me remember the key events, but also gives me kind of a snapshot of my feelings at the time, which are nice to recall, because it's odd doing a podcast. You feel things in the game that you don't necessarily feel later, the day after when you're talking about the game. So it's nice to have those notes. And I wrote down something that I think is really key. Last night felt like the kind of performance Mikel Arteta had coached out of this team. We are undefeated in 18 games against the Big Six. And I remember watching games against Liverpool, against Tottenham, against Manchester United, Chelsea, City, all of those teams. And for many years, seeing us huff and puff, when we have our players and we think, we can compete with this lot. Huff and puff, but actually become unstuck with a lack of composure, with a kind of very flustered approach to trying to get things done. And almost, we spoke a lot around when we were kind of just coming into Mikel Arteta's stronger period as manager, because I feel like there's been two halves to his time here. We spoke a lot about getting rid of those voodoos, beating Tottenham away, beating Liverpool at all, beating Manchester City at all, and every one of those we ticked off felt like a huge milestone, and it felt like a real shift away from this kind of performance that we saw last night. And I remember watching many of these games and seeing performances like last night against the Big Six, and now I feel like we go into games against any of those teams and we don't do that. We run the narrative. I mean, Sunday was a great example of that. Even though Manchester City had a lot of the ball, we controlled that game. And there was only very few moments where I thought, we don't really have control of this. And that's against Manchester City. Last night we played Newcastle, and I think the context for me really mattered and really drove what happened last night, because in those games previously where we'd looked flustered and we were trying to change the narratives about beating Liverpool, about beating City, we felt the weight of that narrative. We felt the weight of Arsenal have not beaten this lot in X many years, and it felt like the team were almost desperate to overcome that barrier. They were desperate to try and win a game that they hadn't won in so long. And I almost felt like that last night. There was a desperation in our play right from the start to be like, we have to overturn this. We must overturn this. And absolutely, that is a great attitude to have, but only into the point that it helps you. And I felt last night our performance was we lacked composure because of that feeling. We were guns blazing already at the start, and we basically sleptwalked into a trap, I think, where Newcastle know if we run the game with the ball or we run the game with the spaces and we get domination of territory and stuff, they probably don't have the players to cope with us. But on the flip side of that, if we get into a physical battle with them, we don't have the players to cope with them. as much as we've come on, with William Saliba, Gabriel, Declan Rice, Kai Havertz, these big guys who are there to help us win physical battles, I don't think there are many better teams in the league than Newcastle at going, you know what, we're going to make life hell for you, especially at St James's Park. And that's what they did. And because we were so uncomposed and so borderline desperate to overturn this deficit, I feel like we just walked into that trap. We were moving at 1,000 miles an hour, really trying to get things done, and we didn't have our usual kind of control and pace. Now, Arteta said before the game that we were going to go full gas. And I think, it was a nice turn of phrase, but I think we took it a little bit too literally. I understand where Arteta's coming from. He's trying to set up for the players. We're not just going to accept defeat. We're not going to accept the first leg. We're going to go for this. Why shouldn't we go for this? And that's exactly the right attitude. But I think it was taken a little bit too literally, and we went into a game where we thought we were going to walk into St James's Park and bang the door down. Whereas what we normally do, and makes a lot more sense, is we kind of pick the lock of things and we wait and we do things in a slightly different way. I guess, as well, some people would argue that they wish we banged the door down a bit more. But I think that against Newcastle probably doesn't work. It works maybe against Everton and Ipswich, where they're already trying to sit deep. But Newcastle have a fantastic ability to break. They have a fantastic ability to manage physical battles and stuff like that. And for me, we played exactly the game they will have wanted us to play, in the sense that we were going at 1,000 miles an hour straight away, and they went, fine, we will play at 1,000 miles an hour straight away, and we'll see who wins this match of physicality, of dominating spaces, of not playing ping ball, but this kind of carnage football that isn't the normal composed lock picking that Arsenal go through. So that was one of my major reflections from last night, and I have to, first of all, give credit to Newcastle. There's been a lot of chat online recently about banter and Arsenal giving it, Arsenal taking it, Manchester City giving it, Manchester City taking it, this crazy rule on celebrations that might come in. And, I am, for one, am a person who I like a bit of needle. I think that it's really important that we keep that in football. And football stays fun and stays competitive and stays about rivalries. And to have that in football, I think at points you just have to put your hands up and go, okay, our rivals bested us. At the same way, we want Manchester City fans to say, rather than kicking off about, X, Y, and Z about Sunday, a mature response would be, you know what, we gave it to you and you've given it back. Fair enough. Fair enough. That's where we're at. And as Gabriel said, we'll see you at our place. Well, Manchester City should be saying that now about next year's Premier League games, and be thinking about that and how they can get their revenge on us. I think Newcastle absolutely kind of managed that brilliantly yesterday, in the sense that all of that rivalry, all of that intensity between the two teams, they did a very, very good job of harnessing that within their stadium, throughout their players, and all that kind of rivalry bubbled over for them into a victory. And for us, I think it bubbled over into a lack of composure, and all of that kind of discourse online is really, really good. And I think we as Arsenal fans have to remember that 2 days ago we were telling City fans, you've got to take it. Well, Newcastle had our number. Well, I could say for the whole of this season, but especially last night, they absolutely had our number. And I think it's important that we recognise that, because 2 days ago we were dishing it to City fans. So we have to put our hands up and say, they played incredibly well. They have one of the best strikers in the world. They have a fantastic left winger who is really, really coming into his own, and I expect he will be a prominent feature in the England squad for years to come soon. And they have a fantastic coach who, for Eddie Howe has had lots and lots of criticisms, but for me, this is a guy who has really, really got Mikel Arteta's number. Tactically, he is one of the few guys who's really done Mikel Arteta, and not, Mikel Arteta's not been able to solve it over a period of a large number of games. So I very much doubt there's a Newcastle fan listening to this, but if you're an Arsenal fan with a Newcastle fan in your life, don't go making excuses. They were very good last night. They were very, very good. I thought Tonali and Guimaraes in the middle that was incredible. The way they managed that space, in the sense that usually they'd go 4-3-3, they went sort of a 5-2-3 with the wing backs helping the midfield, but Guimaraes and Tonali were everywhere, and our midfield of Rice, Ødegaard, Partey was sensational against Manchester City, and the two midfielders of Newcastle kept them quiet, kept them out of the game, which I thought was really, really impressive. And obviously, our two centre-backs, I will come on to this a little bit later in some of their performances, but our two centre-backs have locked up Victor Gyökeres this year, they've locked up Erling Haaland. Very few strikers get the better of these guys. And what's even more, I don't think I've ever seen a striker in the way that Alexander Isak does. I'm going to say it, embarrass them the way he did last night and has in the previous legs as well. He completely rattled our two most unrattable players. I couldn't believe what I was watching from William Saliba. I think that's probably his worst game in an Arsenal shirt. Not to slam on the guy, and I think that's important as well. I posted this on Blue Sky. On Sunday, they gave us the same players gave us one of the best Emirates Stadium memories that many of us will ever have. And my voice is still recovering from it. You can hear that a little bit. And then they've had a very bad game last night. I'm not going to slam them. They were very good 2 days ago, basically. So we've got to really remember, put it into context, zoom out. I'm not going to slam Ødegaard for his performance last night. I'm not going to slam Kai Havertz, because I think these players have given their all over a very, very difficult start to this year. 11 games, basically since 1st of January to the 5th of Feb, 3.3 days per game. Only 4 fit forwards for the majority of it. 6 games against teams who are Big Six or have Champions League aspirations. So it's been a really difficult start to 2025 for Arsenal. So I'm not going to come and slam them, but I can recognise that they had bad days, chief most of which, that doesn't make any sense. Very good English from me. Most of which, was William Saliba. He was that kind of, I don't want to say culprit, but top culprit of, players who struggled last night. And I think that gives us a good chance to get into some of the goals and some of the Newcastle style. Obviously, very early, we had the offside goal for Alexander Isak, where he gets in behind and strikes a fantastic finish. It was a hair offside. They didn't show it immediately, but we got the replay at half-time, and it was very, very tight, and I felt like we dodged a bullet at that point, because it wasn't great defending from us, and we allowed Isak to get in and just kind of fly past our defence. And then it felt like maybe we've got an opportunity. We started to get a little bit more control in the game. We started to get our foot on the ball, and it almost felt like that was a sliding doors moment here at this point in the game, where if we score our chance, this game goes the opposite direction, where their crowd, rather than getting up for it, gets nervous, and our players, rather than getting cagey and uncomposed and flustered, we get calmer, we get closer to the goal, we establish control. And it's a good move through the midfield, which ends up with Martinelli, and he kind of, as he's tackled, manages to flick it to Ødegaard. On the Sky Sports stream, they spoke about how much the ball was spinning, and maybe if that impacted the strike, but I just don't think it's a very good strike. Ødegaard is kind of trying to take it quickly because he knows the defenders are all around him, and he hits it with his weaker foot, and it grazes the post and goes out. But there was a channel there for him. And there is a wider discussion about Ødegaard's output this season. We talk a lot about, is Kai Havertz scoring enough? Well, I'd argue that Declan Rice and Martin Ødegaard, and I'm going to throw Mikel Merino in there as well as the players that play in the 8 spots, they are not scoring enough. They're not scoring anywhere near enough for me. And we have to do more from those positions. And that felt like a moment, a really gilt-edged chance that should have gone in. Again, I don't want to slam the guy for it, but it was a real sliding doors moment. And if you need to overturn a 2-goal deficit, because remember, that's what we were at, at that point, we were at a 2-goal deficit. You have to score that. It has to go in, because it completely changes the complexion. Games are about moments like that. Games really depend on game state, and that would have completely changed the game state. Especially considering from the very goal kick that Newcastle get, they go and score. Now that ball comes in, and when it reaches William Saliba, I think this is a really bad moment for him. A really bad moment. He gets ahead of Isak, which I thought, great, that's what we want, and that's what he's done against Gyökeres and Haaland and other players. He's said, you know what, I'm big enough, I'm strong enough, I'm going to get around you, and I'm going to dominate that space. But I think Isak has Gabriel and Saliba's number in that he puts a bit of doubt in their mind. He puts a little bit of doubt in their mind, and it looked like Saliba gained the space and then sort of froze underneath it and went, okay, how do I dominate this ball now? And that split second of indecision or delay, I don't really know what it was, allowed Isak to get in there and challenge him and get his foot up round the outside. He obviously beats Saliba to the ball there and gets flicked around, and then from that point forward, Newcastle are fantastic there. It's a fantastic flick. Gordon with a rapid ball inside of Isak. How those two managed to do those two actions, I don't know, because it was like they fired the ball at each other and they just managed to make it stick both times. Isak flies away from Saliba, and I watch all of the Arsenal games with my fiance. She was speaking about, does Gabriel need to cover Murphy a bit better? Should he be more aware? I think it'd be harsh to say this is Gabriel's fault, but I can see where she's coming from in the sense that the ball cannons off the inside of the right post, the Arsenal's right post, and comes straight to Murphy. It's a stroke of good fortune for them, but it looked like Gabriel had stopped at that point. For me, it's much more William Saliba losing the early battle, and it's tucked home to an empty net because David Raya's gone for the first shot. Fantastic finish from Jacob Murphy. I know it's an empty net, but it's a very difficult finish with it bouncing and spinning the way it is. And from an Ødegaard miss to maybe a minute later, we are 1-0 down. Like I say, it was a real sliding doors moment and changed the game state, changed the nature with inside that stadium. They were suddenly not just up for it, they were up for it at 0-0. But it was up for it and thinking, I think the stadium probably thought, can we humiliate them here? Can we give them one? Which, to be fair, I think Newcastle have absolutely given us 3 already this year. So if it had got any more bleak than 2-0, that would have been tough to take. But, the stadium really erupted after that point. And we didn't really respond in the best way. Like I mentioned, our performance was very flustered, and I think that goal added to the flusteredness. But obviously it was 1-0 at half-time, and we ended up conceding another goal, the Gordon goal, just after half-time. This one was really bad. Really, really bad, and it's an uncharacteristic mistake for Arsenal. If you play out from the back, you will concede a goal that's kind of like this. In some way, it's a risk that you take, and I think it's a risk that you accept. You have to accept if you want to be a team that dominates the ball and plays out from the back and draws presses onto you. You have to accept that at one point you are going to concede a goal like this. But just given the nature of the game and given the nature of the way Newcastle were playing, it was frustrating to see David Raya play a complete hospital pass into Declan Rice. It's fantastic tactically from Newcastle in the sense that Fabian Schär goes flying into Declan Rice. That's a centre-back doing that. And I must admit, when I watched it and they brought it up on Sky Sports and spoke about that, I have, in the back of my memory, a memory of them doing that before. Now, I can't remember what game, whether it was this season or last season, but I have a memory of that tactic happening, and we weren't aware of it. We weren't wise to it. And David Raya plays a very poor pass into Declan Rice. It's gone down in the stats as Declan Rice having a mistake leading to a goal. I think that's very, very unfair. This, for me, is all about David Raya making the wrong decision at the wrong time. Schär goes flying in, wins the ball. It ends up with Gordon, and it's a simple finish. And it just felt, the most frustrating thing about last night for me is I can understand a world where we get flustered trying to chase this 2-goal lead. I can understand how coming in as a team 2-0 down to St James's Park makes some of your performance more challenging and all the energy we expended on Sunday, etc., etc. But the goals were of our own making and they were completely avoidable. And I just think that if we get, I'm not even going to talk about us getting a goal, if we keep them more, at 0-0, and the crowd just starts to die a little bit, we get into this game. And I said it before, I'll say it again, game state is so important. And we allowed them to run the game state by making two really, really silly errors. Now, I'm going to take a break here, and when I come back, I'm going to talk a little bit about their forward line versus our forward line and the style that they played with, because I think it's really important moving forwards to analyse how we're going to deal with this, because I don't know if you're aware, but we have these guys very late in the season. I think it's our penultimate game, so we need a different plan against Newcastle. What could that different plan be? I'm going to talk about that in part 2. Hello everyone, I just want to say a massive thank you for listening to this match review podcast, and just interrupt very, very quickly to ask a small favour from you guys. If you like this episode or any episode of Arsenal Unfiltered, please do consider dropping me a review or dropping me a follow on your podcast provider. It really, really helps this podcast grow. It's completely free, and it will help you get my content 3 times a week straight to your device. Thank you very much. Hello and welcome back to part 2. So, like I mentioned before, I'm going to talk a little bit about the forward lines, and I'm going to start with the crushing blow from yesterday. I mean, look, all the online banter will be a bit annoying and a bit tough, but we have to take it. I think we also have to take the defeat because a lot of the damage was already done from the first leg. And I also think we need to take it on the chin that I think Newcastle have had the better of us this season, from the league game to the 2 League Cup games. What is really, really hard to take is the Martinelli injury last night. Now, we don't know how bad that's going to be. He needs to get a scan. That's what Mikel Arteta said after the game. But he went down. He was holding his hamstring. We know how difficult hamstring strains are. We've experienced, all ends of the spectrum of that this year, with Bukayo Saka having to undergo surgery. So we've got to pray that Gabriel Martinelli is okay, and that is just a minor tweak, and the 10 days that he's going to have off in Dubai and with the team are going to be good for him and going to mean that this doesn't turn into a more serious issue. On the flip side of this, if Gabriel Martinelli is out for a number of weeks or months, as it could be, we have a massive problem. Because at that point we will have had Gabriel Jesus, Bukayo Saka and Gabriel Martinelli out of the front line, leaving the other 3 dedicated forwards of Raheem Sterling, who I have made the point on many occasions on this podcast, he is now basically non-productive for Arsenal. Kai Havertz, who I think has had a brilliant season for all his criticism, but one thing I must say is that when he starts to get tired, you can really see it, because he gets through so much work. He doesn't drop his work rate, but you can see the quality drop. And, that's not a criticism. He's doing a lot of this on his own. He needs some help. And Leandro Trossard, who, whilst I think has really improved over the last few weeks, is still not having a great season in terms of output. Now, we've obviously found Ethan Nwaneri on the right wing as well, but he's also needed for Odegaard cover. So he's part forward, part midfielder. And if Gabriel Martinelli is out, we were thin already on the ground. We have a real problem. We are suddenly at critical point where if Kai Havertz can't play or Leandro Trossard can't play, we basically don't have enough players. We don't have another forward, and we certainly don't have options from the bench that we can call upon. Especially if you, like me, consider Raheem Sterling just someone to do trash minutes. We are in a real sticky patch. Now, touch wood, Gabriel Martinelli is fine. Let's pray for that. We have to pray for that. But it just feels like another knife in the back of our season that has been so full of these disappointing moments. Maybe we got a bit used to, last season where the team felt, impenetrable and unfazed by injury or anything like that. And I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, woe betide us, but it's very Arsenal to make a decision. Okay, we're okay with what we've got. We're not going to do anything this January transfer window because we can't make the exceptional target work, and we're going to risk it with our front line to all of a sudden in the next game after the window closes lose one of those players that you're counting on to be available. It's gutting. I think if we lose Gabriel Martinelli for an extended period and we don't see Bukayo Saka returning anytime soon, we are going to have to come up with something different. That's where I'm at with it right now. I think we'll have to find a different way to play. Maybe if we go into a sort of midfield diamond, I don't know, where we actually deploy Partey, Rice, Marino, and then Ødegaard in a true 10, with Havertz and Trossard up front, or Wanyeri in the 10, and put even more on our fullbacks to get up and around them, and actually also have Marino and Declan Rice doing some of those overlapping runs and find a way to do that. I think that's probably one solution that we could deal with. I don't see a solution where Raheem Sterling starts starting every game, or he's our only option off the bench. So there's going to have to be a change of system, I think, at some point. If we lose Gabriel Martinelli, if we don't lose him, I think it's a real warning sign to the board, isn't it? And strengthens that summer position of we must add probably 2, maybe 3 bodies, because we'll lose Raheem Sterling. We doubt that Gabriel Jesus will be back. So, if you think everyone that we know will be healthy, we've got 4. Trossard, Havertz, Martinelli, Saka. In the summer, Sterling's gone. Jesus, we know, won't be healthy. So we need to add 2 or 3 to that line, whether that's internally from Wanyeri and we bring in someone else to cover Ødegaard, or we have 2 or 3 externally, hopefully Sesko, someone like that. But we need to add more. That's a great point. Let's trigger off of that and go on to the discussion about Alexander Isak, because he's someone who Arsenal have been heavily linked with for a summer transfer and a summer move. I have said many, many times, I don't think you can pay £150 million for any player. There is no player in the world that's worth it, but he is really trying to make that look like a very silly statement, isn't he? A fantastic performance last night. Didn't get his goal. Probably deserved his goal, 2 or 3 maybe, because he came very close with the shot that deflected to Murphy. And he was obviously a hair offside for the first goal. So for me, Alexander Isak is one of the best strikers in the world right now. I still don't know if we can justify £150 million on one player, but it might just be worth it to get him off Newcastle's books, right? He is exactly what we need in terms of complementary to Kai Havertz for me. I just feel like that's too much, and I feel like someone coming in like Sesko might be a better option at a lower price point, and he sits on more of a level pegging with Kai Havertz, and they compete for the minutes. If Isak comes in at 150 million, Kai Havertz has to move somewhere else in the team, right? He cannot keep a £150 million player on the bench. That's just not going to happen. A real interesting comparison between our 2 front lines here for Arsenal and Newcastle. Newcastle's front line has absolutely got quality, but and I don't mean this to disparage them, when I look at the 2 front lines, I think ours is built primarily to add kind of class on the ball. Kai Havertz is quite a cultured player, as is Leandro Trossard, as is Bukayo Saka. And that's not to say that they don't have pace and physical qualities. I think they do. But when you're comparing them to Newcastle's, that is built around pace and physicality. And again, I'm not saying that these guys don't have quality. Gordon and Isak definitely have masses of quality. I'm just talking about the kind of very slight shift in the 2 styles. And one thing I think is really interesting is watching us. We tried to kind of come in and bully Newcastle last night, and Kai Havertz has done a very good job of that at times. I remember kind of the Liverpool game earlier in this season and last year as well. He was very good at that. Leandro Trossard has that kind of nastiness around him, but we weren't able to bully them. And on the flip side of that, people have tried to bully Gabriel and Saliba before and not managed it, whereas Isak and Gordon last night were all over them and made them look very, very silly. I just think I thought it was a really interesting comparison how both have very, very good physical and high quality players on the ball, technical players, but they're slightly shifted one way or the other. Gordon's main weapons is pace, Isak, his pace and his physicality as well as his finishing, whereas you might look at Trossard and Havertz and go, well, they are still quite physical players, but their main qualities are about being cultured and being technical and all of that sort of stuff and being intelligent. Intelligence is a real high index thing in the Arsenal front line. And when we went to war with them last night, there was only one forward line that was on top against two defences that are very good at not getting bullied. One of them managed it and one of them didn't. I thought it was a really interesting kind of indication, and I think Newcastle are a very good team, but what they have in abundance is this ability to go direct, and they've done it to us multiple times. When we go direct, I don't know. I don't think it's our best option. It's great that we can do it. It's great that we can go to Kai Havertz, but he doesn't win tons of those kind of long balls. He wins a good majority, but not tons. And we certainly used to have Gabriel Martinelli who could go in behind, but I don't think we've been able to kind of unlock him for a long period with those balls over the top. Comparing him and Anthony Gordon last night was night and day. And again, I don't say this to criticise any of the Arsenal players. I think they've given their all over the last little period. But watching Isak and Gordon in comparison to our forwards, I was really struck at the difference between the two teams. Let's just zoom out a little bit and think about where this leaves us. We have 10 days in Dubai now, and we are going to hopefully rest everyone up. I've seen this morning that Jack Porter and Max Dowman are going with the team. How they're getting those kids out of school, I have no idea. But really important time for those guys to learn and develop and train with the first team in an even more focused environment. So that's fantastic news. Last year we had the Dubai break that felt like a miracle cure for all of our finishing ailments, and we came back and we were able to finish all of a sudden. I think we have bigger problems this year going into this period in the sense of availability and stuff like that. Stuff that maybe Dubai isn't going to be able to solve. I think last year's Dubai trip almost kind of solved a pressure problem of how can we finish? We need to finish better. How have we dropped points? Manchester City are starting their charge. What can we do? What can we do? And it allowed us to go out of that environment for 10 days. Actually, it might have been more last year. And have a bit of fun and relax and take that pressure off. This year, our pressure is massively revolved around physicality rather than kind of the finishing burden that was on the team last year. It's much more about minutes in legs and freshness and sharpness and stuff like that. And I don't know if 10 days is going to solve that. If Martinelli's out, 10 days definitely doesn't solve that because he won't be getting sharp. He'll be, retreating physically. And we don't get Bukayo Saka back in that time. We don't get Gabriel Jesus back in that time. So, yeah, they might come back into the few games after the break, of which I think we had a slightly nicer run of it after the break, which is good. West Ham and Leicester, the first two games. But they might come back into those games a little bit fresher, but there's still not enough players to share the minutes with them. This is where I'm at with this break, is let's not get our hopes up too much. Because last year it was like that mental refresh, and I think you can achieve that in the time period. This feels like we need more of a physical refresh, and whilst we'll get something out of 10 days, we don't get more players back. So it is a bit of a sticking plaster over the wider problem, and yeah, I think we need to be very, very cautious about what we expect from Arsenal when they come back. West Ham, Leicester, great, but then we're back into a really tough schedule again. And we need to be aware of that as fans and be cognizant that actually we're going to be threadbare till the end of the season, and there will be games like yesterday's where we get overrun by a really quality team, and there will also be games coming up where just that tiredness starts to show, and we show that we don't have enough players to share the numbers around. I'm going to be talking about our transfer window approach at the weekend in an episode of the Arsenal Roundup, so stick around for that. But what I will say now is, however you feel about the Arsenal position in the January transfer window and where it leaves us now after this defeat, etc., is that Arsenal did not want to become financially liable for a player they didn't think impacted the project. And any player that does impact the project is really rare and not available right now. So, yeah, we might see a Gabriel Martinelli injury and we might say, well, that's exactly why we should have brought someone. And that's not how business decisions work. You're not going to go out and spend 10 million quid on a loan or 30 million quid on a player who you don't think is good enough long term just in case Martinelli gets injured. And maybe if there was a very cheap opportunity to be had, then that is something we should have done. But I don't think there was a very cheap opportunity that happened in the window that we would have wanted to do. And anything else that was more expensive, they've chosen to kind of hold back and hope. So hindsight's 2020, and we need to remember that when we analyse these decisions. I'm going to leave it there. It was a tough night yesterday, wasn't it? But I think credit to Newcastle. They have absolutely got our number this year. A shame for our performance. A performance I thought we'd coached out, but maybe it's a learning point for some of these players. Maybe it's a chance for us to look back at this kind of two-legged semi-final and say, okay, we're not going to let that happen again. What do we do? How do we do it better? And yes, it's another trophy missed, but I think most of us as Arsenal fans had kind of let that go after the first leg already, and it was only going to be a bonus if we got to the final rather than something we felt was genuinely realistic. Like I said in the middle, if you want to give me a follow or leave me a review, that would be super helpful, and I'd really appreciate it. Wherever you get your podcasts from, a follow is nice and easy and brings you 3 of these podcasts every single week, and do match reviews, the Arsenal Roundup, which is the news show, and all of that sort of stuff. So please consider a follow or a review. And lastly, just leave you with this thought of these are still the same players who've had a really good run in the Premier League recently, who smashed Manchester City 5-1. These players are still giving 100% for the team. Yes, we can criticise. Yes, we should analyse what they're doing. Yes, we can say Saliba had a bad game and Ødegaard should have tucked that chance away, etc., etc. But we need to remember that these guys are really trying for our team, and they're trying to achieve exactly what we want, and they're giving 100% for that. Of course, if they ever stop giving 100% for that, we can criticise in a different way. But we've got to remember they are really, really trying, and they are humans too. So let's not take too much of our frustration and upset with this season out on those guys. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for following. Thank you for listening, and I'll speak to you very, very soon.